Welcome to Inspirational Journeys, everyone. My name is Ann Harrison, and I am excited to have as my returning guest Randy Ingermanson. He's got a new book to tell us about. So, welcome to the show, Randy.
Hey, Ann, thanks for having me on your show today.
Thanks for coming back. So, why don't you give new listeners and viewers a little bit of an introduction? Introduce yourself in case somebody has missed the original show. And just so you know, you are one of my most popular guests. You're number two on my top 10.
Wow.
Yep.
So I have a very strange background. I write novels, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. But I
Mhm.
also have a PhD in theoretical physics, and that scares some people and makes some people want to ignore me, and some people maybe find that interesting, especially since I went to UC Berkeley, which is a very interesting school. I have worked for a long time, writing scientific software, and I have written a bunch of novels, and I've also become quite famous around the world for my method for writing a novel, getting your first draft out. It's a 10-step process that is used just all around the world by tens of thousands of people. So that's really made me quite famous in the writing community. And recently, I've written a new book in my Crown of Thorns series. So this is book 2 in my series of novels about Jesus of Nazareth.
Right. And we have talked about that's one of the things we talked about when you first came on here was the Snowflake Method. So do go back. The link to the previous episode is in the show notes or the previous YouTube video. Do go back and watch that because you're going to find some very helpful and useful information there. And I won't go back through the same questions I did before since you've been on here before, but what was the inspiration behind Son of David?
Well, so it's book 2 in the series of novels that I'm writing. So I might say that book 1 was the inspiration for it, but it really goes back to almost 20 years ago. My agent called me up one day and he says, "Hey, I think you should write a novel about Jesus." And I says, "Okay, yeah, actually, that sounds good." It turned out he had a publisher who was interested in me writing interested in getting a novel about Jesus. And my agent flipped through his Rolodex and says, Randy's written 3 novels about life in first century Jerusalem. Randy's my go-to guy. So I took a stab at it. Things did not work out. That project crashed and burned. About, I don't know, it took a year or two, but it finally crashed and burned. And I thought, well, okay, that project is dead. It's never going to go anywhere. But I kept the files because I never throw anything away. And then, probably 5 or 6 years later, it became possible for people to publish um, books themselves independently. Just like indie musicians can
Mm-hmm.
produce their own music albums independently, and they often do better than they would with a big record label. In the same way, many novelists have realized that they actually just do better. They have more freedom to write what they want to write, and they have more. They actually earn more money out the back end by just uh, publishing their novels themselves or their nonfiction books on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Smashwords, just the whole lineup of electronic retailers, Apple
Mm-hmm.
Books. So that's kind of the motivation. That's how the book came to be. I'm not sure that was your question, though.
That's
Maybe you're
okay. That's okay.
maybe you were asking, what's the book about?
Well, you can tell me. Well, that was going to be my next question. Why don't you kind of give us a little bit of a brief summary of what the book is about?
Sure, sure. So the book picks up about a year into the public ministry of Jesus, and the the massive problem that Jesus confronted was that he was not the sort of Messiah that everyone expected him to be. Okay, I mean, there was a huge expectation on here's what a Messiah is in first century Judea and in Galilee, and it boils down to, we need a guy to kick out the Romans, and he's going to do it by raising up an army. He's going to take up the sword, just like the Maccabees 200 years ago. He's going to drive out the enemy, push them into the sea, and he will, be the son of David, and he will, set up an everlasting kingdom like his father David 1,000 years earlier. Okay, that's a massive set of expectations to put on any guy, but that's just not the kind of person Jesus was. Okay, Jesus was not a guy to pick up the sword. He was not a man of blood.
He was
King David
God in the flesh. Yeah.
King David was a killer, right?
Mm-hmm.
He killed the giant. He killed he killed 200 Philistines as a bride price for the daughter of King Saul. King David was a man of blood. Jesus was not a man of blood, and he knew it. But anyone who uttered the word Messiah around Jesus would be thinking, we need a guy who's gonna kill, maim, destroy, murder, do whatever it takes to destroy our enemy. So you should know also that the word enemy, if you translate that into Hebrew, it is the word Satan. We pronounce it Satan these days. So Satan in Hebrew just means an enemy, an adversary, the accuser, something like that. And in the time of Jesus, I'm quite certain that when the Jews looked around to see who is our enemy, they saw Rome, right? So in my novel, Son of David, I have them continually referring to Rome as the great Satan, in exactly the same way that, back in the, a few decades ago, the Iranian revolutionaries who threw out the Shah of Iran saw America as their greatest enemy, the great Satan, okay? In exactly that same way, Jews in the first century saw Rome as the great Satan. This is our enemy. These are the people. These people are anti-God. We must destroy them. It's our religious duty. So
yes.
what you had in the time of Jesus was, not only massive economic oppression by Rome, but you also had a sort of a rising military spirit, and people regarded it as their religious duty to kill the Romans. Okay, and Jesus walks onto the scene and he's saying weird things like love your enemies. Okay, that is considered weird today, right? If you actually think about loving your enemies, that's a hard thing to do today. When I think about, the people who have oppressed me in my life, I don't want to love them. I want revenge. I want retribution. I want retaliation.
You want to be angry.
Yes. And sometimes we have good reason to be angry. That does not mean that we should kill our enemies.
Right.
Okay. But it was 100 times more in the time of Jesus. Okay, we have had 2,000 years to sort of get used to the idea that loving your enemies is something that we at least ought to think about doing. It's considered a good thing, among religious people these days. Nobody, to my knowledge, nobody in the time of Jesus had ever thought about loving their enemies. Okay, that was a radical, revolutionary new idea. And that was a central part of the message of Jesus, as far as here's how we deal with the Roman problem. Here's how we deal with our oppressors, the great Satan. We don't take up the sword like the Maccabee heroes from 200 years ago. We don't drive them into the sea. We have to find some way to love them. And thereby turn them from enemies into friends, and that's how we destroy our enemies. Okay,
Right.
that was a part of the message of Jesus, not the whole message of Jesus, but that's the part that I'm focusing on in this book. So this is book 2 of 4. So in each of the 4 books, I will, focus on, one of the issues that Jesus raised. But in this book, it's about how do we love our enemies? What does that mean? What does that look like? And how do you persuade anyone to do that when
Right.
it's such an unnatural thing? It's totally unnatural for any human. It's unnatural for me.
It's unnatural for me, but I know God says we have
It,
to do it.
right, right. So how do we do that? And Jesus found a way, which I show in the book. I show the way that Jesus found to put a desire in our hearts to love our enemies.
Forgiveness. You make me think of Matthew 6:14 when you talk
Uh,
about
uh, let's see. So what does Matthew 6:14 say?
forgive what is it? Forgive those your trespasses, and your Father in
Yeah,
heaven will forgive you. Yeah. I'm
yeah,
paraphrasing a
yeah,
bit, but
yeah.
yeah.
So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, you've heard, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say to you, this is my new commandment, essentially. I say to you, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, do good to those who hate you.
Mhm.
Okay. That was hard. That was
Yes.
like a bomb cyclone in the structure of Jewish society in those days. That did not make him a popular guy.
Yeah, and that's still hard today. So,
Yeah.
is there one big takeaway that you want people to walk away with when they read the novel?
Yes, there is a way to begin to learn how to love your enemies. Okay. And that is the way that Jesus chose. So near the end of the book, there is the story of the Good Samaritan. Okay. And Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan to his disciples. Now, I think we all know this, but I'm going to just say it again because things that we all know sometimes bear repeating. We all know that the Jews and the Samaritans were mortal enemies. Okay. Jews and Samaritans did not get along, and Samaria was just north of Judea, and just
Mhm.
north of Samaria was Galilee. So, in order for Jesus to walk to Jerusalem for Passover and for the other annual feasts, he could go through Samaria or he could go around Samaria. We know from the New Testament that he often went through Samaria. That meant that he was walking through enemy territory.
Mhm.
Okay, and we know that on some occasions Jewish people were killed coming south from Galilee to Jerusalem for Passover. We have an account of that in the historian Josephus. So we know that that happened. There was very bad blood between Jews and Samaritans. And so Jesus tells this revolutionary story of the Good Samaritan, which I retell in my novel near the end. And uh, the great insight that Jesus had about how do we change ourselves. We change ourselves through story by telling a story in which we are required to identify with a victim. Okay, in the story of the Good Samaritan, who is the victim? The victim is a nice Jewish guy. He's going down the Jericho road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Okay, and that's a dangerous place. I've been
Mhm.
on the Jericho road. It's dry, it's lonely, it's deserted. And in the time of Jesus, it was a hangout for bandits. And so you did not walk down the Jericho road alone. That would be dumb. Okay, this guy is walking down the Jericho road alone. He's set
Oh.
on by bandits. He's beaten. He's robbed. He's left for dead. And along comes one of his countrymen. Okay, a priest. The
Mhm.
priest passes him by. Along comes another countryman. a Levite. Okay, these are the big cheese guys in the hierarchy. Okay,
Okay.
uh, and Jesus is telling the story using the rule of three, where okay, this guy comes by, this guy comes by, and this guy comes by. The natural assumption is, okay, we've had a priest, we've had a Levite, the next person to come by should be just an ordinary man of Israel. That's the three ways that you divide the nation of Israel to this day. Priest, Levite, Israelite. Okay, so we're expecting that an Israelite will come by, an Israelite just like our man who's lying there, dying in the road, but it isn't. It's his mortal enemy. It's a Samaritan. Okay, and that story had an astounding impact on the people of Jesus's day, because this is our enemy. This is a little bit like, a Ukrainian is walking down the road, he gets beaten up, and the president of the country, Zelensky, comes by, passes him by, the vice president passes him by, and then along comes a Russian soldier and helps him. Okay, that's the sort of an impact that this story of the Good Samaritan had on the hearers of his day. And a mortal enemy comes and helps this guy and saves his life, takes him to a place where he can get better, and pays for his stay there. That in a nutshell is the story of the Good Samaritan. And what the key insight that Jesus had is that you tell stories of the victim. That enables people to learn empathy, learn sympathy, compassion for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And once your enemy has shown compassion to you, it is possible for you to feel some measure of compassion now for your enemy. And that was an astounding insight that Jesus had. I don't know anyone in antiquity who ever thought of that before Jesus. I think that was one of his great insights that he left us as humans.
Wow.
So, and I retell that story and I expand on it somewhat greatly. And the story is told while they're going through Samaria in a time of great danger for them, for Jesus and his band of people. So that is, I think, the sort of the high point of the book. It comes near the end.
Okay. So, and when you do your research for books like this, do you do any traveling, or do you do most of your research through passages of scripture and other study text?
I do it all. So I, of course, am very familiar with the New Testament. I have read most of the Old Testament in Hebrew. I have read Josephus, who is the Jewish historian from the first century, who tells us most of what we know about Judea and Galilee in the first century. But I've also been to Israel several times. I've worked on an archaeological dig on Mount Zion in Jerusalem now several times over the last few years, and this is right in the old city of Jerusalem. So we are digging. We've been excavating a palace that belonged to a wealthy family of the first century in Jerusalem on Mount Zion. It was probably the palace of one of the chief priestly families of Jerusalem. Could be Caiaphas, could be his father-in-law Annas, or one of the other 5 families that we know about. But it was some wealthy family. So I've excavated there. I've also excavated at Magdala, so on the Sea of Galilee. That's the hometown of Mary Magdalene, and it's about 6 miles from Capernaum. And Capernaum, as we know, was the headquarters for Jesus in Galilee. That's where half of his disciples lived in Capernaum, and he spent a large amount of time there and basically sent out people all through Galilee from there. Now, it's a walk of about 6 miles to get from Capernaum to Magdala. There is a first century synagogue in Magdala that was excavated at the dig where I worked. Okay, you can visit it today. And if you go to Israel, anyone who goes to Israel should see that first century synagogue at Magdala. It's becoming very, very famous. It's a very popular tourist stop. My guess is Jesus undoubtedly read the Torah or the prophets in that synagogue, probably several times. He was friends with Mary Magdalene, and he was also friends with, some of her friends who were wealthy, who lived in that area. To me, it seems like this is a no-brainer that Jesus was right there. So I've been all around Galilee, and Judea, looking at the archaeological sites and learning, what was it like there.
Wow. That sounds like it would have been a fascinating dig and a fascinating place to visit.
Yeah. It's a weird thing, but after you've been digging in Jerusalem for a couple of weeks and you're actually living right there in the old city in a hotel, you get this illusion that, hey, I live here. This is my city. I am a native of Jerusalem. And in your head that it's not true, but you just have this odd sensation that, hey, look at all these tourists. They come and go every day, but I'm here. I've been here for weeks and weeks. This is my home.
Home away from home, maybe?
Yes, it very much feels like that. And when we go back there every year, it's like, oh man, it's nice to be home again. This is my city. This is Jerusalem, and to go up on the Temple Mount, to walk through Hezekiah's tunnel. There's an infinite number of things to see in Jerusalem. But it's just an amazing place to be. And just being there, you feel like you are inhaling that story world. And so I try to put that story world into the books that I write.
So when and you're working on book 3 now, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So where can people find you online?
Oh, so I have a website at ingermanson.com. So that's my last name, INGERMANSON.com. And that tells everything about me and my novels. And of course, all my books are available on Amazon.
Okay. And I saw you have a TikTok. Boy, honey, I don't TikTok.
Yeah, I have never really done much with social media until TikTok, and I've found really it's just a lot of fun. So I did a recent video on Mary Magdalene I did it in October, and it's still getting thousands of views every week. It's up to about 40,000 views now. I'm just astounded at how TikTok can find people who are interested in the things that I'm interested in. So on TikTok, basically, my whole thing is I do stuff about the historical Jesus. I just call myself, I'm the historical Jesus guy, and I'm just looking at things. I want to understand, what is the story of Jesus? What did we miss in Sunday school? What did they not tell us because they didn't know, because they hadn't been there? Okay. And that's the kind of thing that I want to talk about in my TikTok channel, and of course on my website and in my books. What is it that they missed in Sunday school that might help us to understand the world of Jesus and the story of Jesus better?
I like that. So, and you snowflake all your novels, right?
Yes, I do. My Snowflake method is it's just the way my brain is wired. I have to work that way.
You inspire me, because now I am starting to create my own method. And if you want to show your book while we're talking about this, I didn't know when to segue into that, but if you want to show that real quick, that's fine. But I love, not only am I a writer, I'm a crocheter, and so I'm working on developing my own little method that would make sense to other writers who do fiber arts.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, if you've got something that you can tell people in just a few steps, here's how you do it. Start here, do this, and do this, and do this. And if each step just feels very doable, then people will love that, because it makes it seem possible. And believing that you can do something is about 90% of the game.
Yep. And then you gotta share it with the world.
Yeah. And one of my great skills is always just believing that I can do things,
Right.
sometimes very crazy. Yes, I could go work on an archaeological dig. I'm old and decrepit, but I can go do this. And so we just did it, my wife and I both, and
Oh
we
wow,
loved it.
that sounds like you guys had a blast doing it too.
Oh
Mm,
yeah,
And
yeah.
when you love what you do, that's half the battle. That's half the
That's
battle right there.
90% of the game.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
90%. No, that's
We
yeah, you're right.
so many tremendous friends working on the archaeological dig. So yeah, it's great, great. But I am, getting older each year. Apparently, I add another birthday. I don't know how that works, but yeah, I'm feeling like, well, hopefully I can do it for another 10 years, but eventually, time is going to catch up with me, and I won't won't be able
Well,
to anymore.
as long as God still calls you out there, I mean, what else can you do, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just keep trying to do what I can do. Um,
Right. So I want to thank you so much for coming back to the show
well, thanks for having
because
me, man.
because honestly, like I said, you were one of my most popular. Um, I got you got like yeah, like I said, you were number 2 on my top 10 in downloads, and I just wanted and I really like the work that you're doing. So I really appreciate you coming back, and I have been inspired to ask this question because I was listening to another podcast and she did this. So, do you have like a call to action you want to leave the listeners and viewers with? It could be a challenge, it could be a resource, just whatever, just a final.
Yeah, for authors, the call to action is always, "Hey, go buy my book." But okay, so I'll do that, but then I'll give you a real call to action. So go buy my book, Son of David. We did that. If I still had an agent, he would be happy. But so a call to action, I would say this: dare to dream big, dare to do the thing that you always wanted to do in life, because I'm feeling the age coming on. I just turned 64 a couple of months ago. I'm feeling the age, and it's like, am I going to be able to do all the cool things that I wanted to do in life? I hope I can, but I at least did some of them. I went and worked on the archaeological dig. I wrote some novels. I did some fun things, and we're doing interesting things at the biotech company where I work. But that only happens if you take that leap of faith and say, yes, I can do this. I know it's hard. That's what makes it worth doing. I will do this. I will find a way. There's going to be obstacles. I will climb over those obstacles. I will knock them out of my path, because I will not take no for an answer until I decide that maybe I didn't really want to do it after all. I really wanted to do something better, or until I get there, right? And so I've done a few interesting things in life, and it's because I had that attitude, for very many years of just believe in yourself, believe that you can go do it.
Right.
That's
Even
my
if
call to
you
action.
okay, even if you can't see the results. And that brings me to the verse I want to share today, and that's Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So
That's a good verse. Yes.
right, it is. And so I am going to leave us with another challenge. I challenge you to go out there and read to get inspired, write something inspiring, and share your creation with the world. For when you've touched one life, you've touched thousands. And remember, your story matters. Thanks for joining us on Inspirational Journeys, everyone, and have a blessed day.